Yes, Kiran, you can start.
Good evening to you all. This is Kiran Keshamurthy, and I teach English at IIT Guwahati. On behalf of Team Anajuri, I welcome you all to today's Thursday session on gender and sexuality. It gives me great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Debajanee Bora. Debajanee Bora works at the Center for Women's Studies, Dibrugarh University, as a research assistant, where she looks after research and teaching, gender sensitization programs, outreach and extension activities, and networking and coordination. She has completed her graduation from Ramjas College, University of Delhi, and she completed her master's and MPhil from Jawaharlal Nehru University. Um, New Delhi, and she's also where she's also pursuing her PhD. Her area of interest includes women and health, marginalized women, particularly women workers of tea gardens, women and development, women's movements, gender-based violence, and she believes in and strives towards building a gender inclusive society. She's also worked with HelpAge India, New Delhi, as the manager of Student Action for Value Education Program. Her talk today is entitled Gendered Lives in a Tea Garden, looking into the health rights of tea garden women workers. So welcome, Debajanee. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. That is a kind of long introduction. Nonetheless, thank you very much, and a very good evening to everyone. I hope all of you are, doing well, safe, and healthy amidst this uncertainty, such crazy times. And I express my sincere thanks to Team Enachari for giving me this opportunity to interact with you all today. And as Kiran has already mentioned, I am Debajanee. I work at the Center for Women's Studies, Dibrugarh University as research assistant. And my talk is today titled as Gendered Lives in a Tea Garden, looking into the health rights of tea garden women workers in tea plantations. But before proceeding to the main topic, I just want to very briefly talk about the discipline of women's studies and about the center where I work. Because what happens that, whenever somebody asks where do I work or what do I do, and when I say that, I work at the Center for Women's Studies. So it is in most of the occasions, most of the times I have been asked at least once again. Even many times it has happened that, I have been asked more than once, but also, that what did you say? Human studies, or, they, again, I say women's studies, no, Center for Women's Studies. And they're like, oh, sorry, what does that mean? What do you do? So, and I just want to share a very small experience, small as in, it is a small, but it is a very big concern at times. One of the guests came to our place once, and he did not know what do I do. He's definitely knew that I work at Dibrugarh University, but didn't know what I do actually in Dibrugarh University. So when we were having lunch, he asked me, "So what do you do in Dibrugarh University?" I was like, "Well, I work at the Center for Women's Studies." What? I said Center for Women's Studies. Then he just took a pause, and then he asked, "Okay, so what do you do there? Do you teach the students how to control the husbands?" And I was taken aback. Obviously, I have been asked so many times what we do in Center for Women's Studies or what Center for Women's Studies, but that was kind of very unfortunate thing that, people assume that in Center for Women's Studies, we, teach students to how to control husbands. Many of the times we have been asked that what do you do in women's studies, like do we train or teach students like cooking or stitching, embroidery, beauty courses, etc., etc. So when I was invited for this webinar, so I thought that why don't I take this opportunity, and whoever joins us today through the Zoom or through Facebook, so they would at least get to know what women's studies is all about and what the Center for Women's Studies do. So I'd request Priyanshu to, kindly share the PPT, because women's studies is not only in the, not amongst those who are not into academia or anybody, but within the academia also the discipline has been marginalized. It is considered to be in the periphery. So that's why I thought that, I would very briefly talk about the discipline of women's studies. Okay, to the first slide, Priyanshu. Next slide, yeah. Okay, so, women's studies, it is an academic discipline, and it incorporates analytical perspectives and empirical study through feminist methods. So feminist methods is one of the research method which has emerged out of feminist movement and women's movement to bridge the gap between the mainstream other social sciences methodology, so that we can address various issues related to gender and women issues. So it is an academic discipline, and it is an interdisciplinary approach. And most importantly, women's studies places lived experiences and narratives of women's lives in the center. And it examines the socio-cultural constructs of gender and the way various factors such as power, class, caste, gender intersect with each other. So it is a purely academic discipline, but it is also involved with women's movement. It is actually women's studies is an outcome of women's movement. To that I'll come a little later. So women's studies as a discipline, we try to question or address those issues which are otherwise do not addressed by other social sciences to that extent which it deserves to be addressed. So this is an interdisciplinary address, and we try to look at the socio-cultural constructs of gender and the intersectionality between various other factors which play an important role in the society. So this is very briefly about women's studies as an academic discipline. And to the next slide, the objectives of women's studies. In 1982, there was this meeting held in New Delhi, UNESCO meeting of experts in women's studies and social sciences. And at that time, the objectives, drafted in that meeting were such that to promote better and balanced understanding of our societies and how they are responding to process of change, to contribute to the pursuit of human rights, to assist both men and women in understanding, recognizing, and giving due importance to the roles actually played by men and women. At that time, it was men and women because the binary division was division of men and women were in mostly discussed. Later, women's studies also included the debates around the other genders, recognizing and giving due importance to all genders. Then to investigate the causes of disparity, analyzing structural factors in addition to attitudinal and cultural factors. Like what are the cultural factors that decides the lives we live? So to discuss or to study those aspects is one of the important objectives of women's studies. And then to empower women in their struggle for equality and for an effective presence in all areas of society and development. To render invisible women visible, and in particularly the women of the most underprivileged strata. So these are the objectives of women's studies. So around these objectives, there are many other objectives have developed in the later years, in the recent years, because as I said earlier, mostly the debates and discussions were around the binary division or binary categorization of men and women. Now that we discuss, or there are debates, or the other gender identities have also are there, we raise our voices for these gender identities or gender issues as well. So this is women's studies is located itself not only in traditional social science disciplines, but equality in humanities, especially in literature and culture as well. Because, you know, in literature and culture, uh, how women are being represented and how their voices, whether their voices are being recorded or not, those aspects also women's studies, you know, address. Or in fact in sciences as well as in arts, film and media, all these, you know, in all these areas, what are the women and gender issues, women's studies try to address those aspects. So to the next slide, how this whole women's studies originated, what are the genesis of women's studies. So you know, it originated as a part of women's liberation movement in the 1960s, second wave feminist movement. So you know, at that time, scholars who were associated with women's liberation movement and you know, other movement related to women's issues, they felt that, you know, other academic disciplines were not able to understand and study perspectives important to women. So therefore, a new interdisciplinary academic discipline is required to study these issues, their experiences, their lives, gender inequality, etc. Because these issues play a very important role in the society. So as a result of those demands of women's liberation movement, feminist demands and, you know, the feminist movement, women's liberation movement, because of all those demands, United Nations asked all the member countries to conduct studies on status of women in their respective countries. And in the year 1975, United Nations declared the year as International Women's Year. And this is very historic movement. And in Mexico, the first International Women's Conference was held. And at that time, the discipline of women's studies officially got sanctioned from the international community, so that you know, it can address those issues related to gender inequality, related to status of women, and to the, you know, various issues related to women and gender. And following that, in the 1970, you know, the decade, not only the year was declared as Women's International Year, the whole decade from 1975 to 1985 was declared as International Women's Decade. And it adopted the World Action to establish gender equality. So because of that, you know, those development internationally, this women's studies discipline originated. And how it originated in India. To the next slide. So as I have already told that, you know, in the 1970s, early 1970s, the United Nations asked all the member countries to conduct studies on women status in their respective countries. So India was also asked, and as a result of that, Committee of the Status of Women in India was constituted in the year 1971. And a committee was constituted to study the, you know, what is the status and condition of women in India. And the report, Towards Equality Report 1974, this is considered as the, you know, laying ground, the foundation of women's studies in India by many scholars. So this is one historic report which has laid the foundation for women's studies as a discipline in India. And Bina Mazumdar and Latika Sarkar were two very prominent women activists or scholars who were part of this committee, and later they founded the Center for Women's Development Studies in Delhi. And when they were, you know, conducting their field studies and they went out to the field to look at the, you know, the status and the condition of women in India, they were shocked Because what was the assumption that, you know, India got independence and the constitution gave rights to everyone, equal rights to everyone, all citizens, and women had the right to education. Women were going to schools, colleges, and you know, they had the right to vote. So it was an assumption that women were enjoying their rights and their conditions are good. I mean, their status were gradually improved. But this report was an eye opener, because what this report found that, you know, there are so many discriminations or inequality when the, you know, context of women or their status or their condition were in question. So, you know, what are these issues? They came out with these demographic trends of declining sex ratio, disparities in the life expectancy and death rates between men and women, increase in violence against women, difficulties involved in women's access to literacy, education, opportunities, other livelihood, and rising illiteracy among women, and the lack of political and economic participation of women. So this report, you know, kind of make it clear that women, you know, women's status and condition were not in a great position. Women were still to the, you know, the constitution's aim, the aim of the constitution to achieve, the objective to achieve gender equal society was in question. It showed the, you know, failure of the Indian state to address women, you know, the discriminatory nature of society for women. So to the next slide, Priyanshu. So because of that, you know, the report addressed all these issues. Indian Council of Social Science Research, ICSSR, which is a funding agency, research organization, autonomous organization of government of India. They were, you know, they were also in shock. So they started to, you know, give funding for research projects in universities to study the, you know, condition and status and various issues of women, and so that policy changes could be made to address these kind of gender discriminatory issues, you know, the inequality that women are facing. And then in 1981, National Conference on Women's Studies was held, and in that conference it was decided that, you know, to form an organization that is called Indian Association for Women's Studies, IWS, which is a very important platform for academicians as well as activists who are working for women's rights and other gender issues. So this organization platform was formed in 1981, and then UGC also in 1986, it developed the scheme called Development of Women's Studies in Indian Universities and Colleges, and it also later on added various list of extension and outreach activities to be conducted by these centers, which are to be established in Indian universities and colleges. So these are the very important point of time, which are in fact various factors which has created the foundation for women's studies in India. So these, you know, ICSSR and then IAWS, UGC, these were very important for the development of women's studies centers, also the growth of the women's studies as a discipline in India. Okay, to the next slide. So as a result of that, women's studies centers were founded, established across the country. The first women's studies research center was set up in SMBT Women's University, Bombay in 1974, and it became a center officially in 1985. Then in the context of Northeast, the first women's studies center was founded at Guwahati University and in 1989, followed by the WSC at Debajanee University in 1998. And then There were many centers established in other universities of Northeast India, Tezpur, Manipur, Nagaland, Rajiv Gandhi University, Tripura, Mizoram, and there are many women's studies centers in various colleges as well. Okay, to the next slide. So that's how the whole discipline of women's studies and women's studies centers were established. The discipline kind of grew, and in the recent years, there is a debate that whether it should be women's studies or gender studies. There are various debates on the importance or relevance or significance of women's studies or gender studies. In the recent years, when we were coming out of that binary categories of men and women, we have to now address issues of other genders as well. So among the scholars, there are debates that whether we should use the term women's studies or gender studies. There are some who believe that since the goals of women's movement for equal rights and women's representation, equal representation has not been achieved yet, so we should not discard the term women's studies, because if we discard that term, according to this section of scholars, according to them, that if we do not use the term women's studies, it might dilute the concerns which are specific to women. But there are also others who believe that mainstreaming women's studies into the broader rubric of gender studies, if we include that, then it will help not only to address women concerns, but also to include those concerns into the larger discourses, and so that policy could be initiated, or there could be influence on public policy and action. So there is a debate still going on. So at the institutional level, what the universities or colleges have done, that in some institutions they use the Center for Women's Studies and Gender Studies, few use gender studies, but though various universities still use the term Center for Women's Studies, the courses and syllabus or the actions, whatever those centers do, it include various aspects of gender, not only restricted to the binary categories of men and women, but all the issues of all genders. It is inclusive of all gender issues. Okay, so this is what women's studies is all about. So I hope I have kind of tried to very briefly talk about women's studies as a discipline. Now, I'll very briefly talk about what we as the Center for Women's Studies do. To the next slide. So this is the Center for Women's Studies at Debajanee University. We shared a building with Center for Philosophy. And okay, about the center, next slide. So it was approved. It is one of, as I have said, the centers are being established as per UGC guideline, the scheme to develop women's studies in universities and colleges. So it is one of the UGC approved women's studies centers in the country, and in the entire Northeast, it is such second center. It was established in the year 1998, and in 2004, the center got approval from UGC. So to the next slide, what we do. These are the four major areas what we do: teaching, research, extension and outreach activities, documentation, and we have collaborated with Ministry of Women and Child Development, National Commission for Women, State Commission for Women, IWS, UNICEF, and various other NGOs in our various endeavors. In the next slide, we have these programs till 2015. There is this course called Postgraduate Certificate Course in Women's Studies, then Postgraduate Diploma in Women's Studies till from 2015 to 2018. Now we offer Masters in Women's Studies since the last academic year. Next slide. These are the teaching programs. I have just mentioned here about only one particular research, but we have done many research projects, the center. This one was funded and submitted to Ministry of Women and Child Development. It was called Stories Behind a Hot Cup of Assam Tea, listening to the voices of women laborers in the tea gardens. And in the next slides, we have some glimpses of some outreach and extension activities. The students, we have gone to the old age home and we tried to look at the narratives of old age home from a gender perspective. In the next slide, we have some gender sensitization programs, awareness campaigns against sexual harassment, menstrual health awareness programs. And then in the next slide, these are the some campaigns against gender-based violence. The third photo where the students are third and the last where the students are performing. It is a skit called the process of socialization. So where we try to show that how the socialization process kind of make us how we behave, the way we behave. Okay, this is all about the Center for Women Studies. Now, I think we can move to the everyday aspects of, gendered lives. The lives we live is actually very gendered. So we might not feel it, but most of the aspects are everyday aspects are gendered. And how these things happen through socialization process. There are various stages of socialization process, like before the birth, not in India, it happens, but in other Western countries, there is this gender reveal party where the child's gender is being revealed. So from that day onwards, in fact, when a child is conceived, from that day onwards, the socialization process starts till our old age. And these are the various processes of socialization. According to Ruth Hartley has given these processes: manipulation, canalization, verbal appellation, and activity exposure. Through manipulation, like what happens, the way a child is being treated at the family. Like, the boys are treated as strong and the girls are treated as very pretty, very delicate, So the way our minds are being manipulated with these kind of, attributes, how we are being treated, how the child is being treated. It is the first process of socialization. So with that, what happens, this plays a crucial role in shaping the self-perception of girls and boys, how a girl should be or how a boy should be. In fact, in the present context, in all other genders also, they are being perceived, or they are being kind of categorized in certain characteristics. A girl, boy, or other genders, there are characteristics which are being processed or which are being constructed by the society. So and they, with this manipulation process, they start to define their own capabilities and their own categories as that. And then canalization. What is canalization? Like through which objects we are giving those identities, in what way? Like directing the attention of male and female children to various objects, like giving girls the Barbie dolls, the boys the cars and all the machineries and everything. This is called canalization. Then verbal appellation, like how we address the children at home, or the tone. To a boy child, we say, "Hey, young man, okay, look at you. You are looking so strong," or very mature. So for a girl child, we talk about, "Oh, how cute, you are looking so pretty, very delicate." Even our tone changes. So this is one part of socialization process. that is called verbal appellation, according to Ruth Hartley. And the next is activity exposure. Like what are the activities the children are being exposed in their childhood? Like the girls are mostly, after certain age, they are, asked to help their mothers in the household responsibilities. The household chores like cooking, cleaning, or, all those kind of so-called feminine works. And the boys, they are asked to accompany their fathers, or, to, various other activities which are supposed to be, or quote and unquote, masculine activities. So this is how the socialization process starts. And these leads to the next slide. These leads to gender stereotyping, gender identity, and gender roles. How a boy or a girl or other genders are being stereotyped. What are the characteristics of being a boy, being a girl, being different other genders? And then accordingly, their gender identities and gender roles, what they have to perform, what they have to do. And then because of all these, to the next slide, because of all these, how this socialization and all these gender stereotyping and these gender roles, how it is being triggered. There are agencies of socialization: family, educational institution, textbooks, peer group, religion and religious institutions, mass media, workplaces, languages. In family, as I have already told, all those processes of socialization, being it the verbal appellation, how we address manipulation, canalization, or activity exposure, everything happens at the family level. Then when the child goes to the educational institutions, there also they are being treated according to their gender. Even when they are asked to choose the subjects at that context also, they have there is discrimination, or there is stereotyping that the girls are good at arts and humanities and social sciences. Boys are meant for these vocational courses like engineering. In engineering also, mechanical engineering are more for boys, and the others are for girls. So that ways. And in fact, textbooks also, in the school level textbooks, what we generally see, the mother is in the kitchen and the father is reading the newspaper, or taking a sip of tea or anything, or the father is going to the office, the mother is helping him or serving him breakfast or any food. So in textbook also, in examples of textbooks also, I remember when I used to do the maths examples, maths, there also the maths, the question used to be like, the father Ram went with so and so, went with his father to the market, and they bought this much vegetable for this much amount, and what is the sum. So in those examples also, those are very gendered. Why only the father goes to the market, and why only the son accompanies the father to the market? So when the children reads all these things, their behavior, and they internalize those gendered aspects, and that becomes a normal activity in our lives. Similarly, in religion or religious institutions are also very gendered. How in religion, most of the, I think in all the religions, the priest or the main person in any religious institution is mostly the man. And the way in religious institutions, like for example in Assam, in Namghars, how the sitting arrangements are: the men sit at the front, and the women sit at the back. So these are the very small things, but these are the gendered aspects of everyday life. Then in mass media is so much gendered. Be it print, electronic, social media, everything is so gendered. When we look at all those journals or magazines, we can always see the sections. Many sections are only to women in the context of beauty, cooking, and everything. In fact, the storybooks, when we come to the storybooks are also considered, according to some, are part of mass media. So in storybooks also, the princesses are always helpless and there has to be a prince to rescue them. Then in electronic medias, in all the movies, serials, the anchors, it is mostly the men who are given the prime parts. And the songs and everything, I'm not going into the details because I have to also talk about the tea garden. So in the language also, how we speak, female farmer, women and women police officer, women pilot, these are the words we use, but these are very, very, very gendered. So these are the social agencies of socialization which triggers, the gender stereotyping. It gives us the gender roles, gender identities, and these leads to various gender-based violence, then gender discrimination. To the next slide. Because of all these, that we trivialize these gendered aspects, we normalize these gendered aspects so much that gender discrimination, it results in gender discrimination, then gender-based violence. Because gender discrimination, we don't see it as a problem at when it is happening at our homes. It's like in many times what happens, it's like this is very normal. We normalize these gender discriminations, and nowadays what happens, when we are aware about these gender issues and all, many say that it does not happen at our home. But is it true? Actually, does it not happen at your home? Do you see your father always get up very early in the morning and do all the household works? There would be rare cases, of course, I agree to that. But mostly that is the very gendered aspects in our lives. And because we normalize these kind of things, we also normalize gender-based violence. Like, men are so masculine, macho, if they hit the women, we just trivialize things. We normalize this gender discrimination and gender-based violence, and this lead to our everyday life as gendered. So this is how we have been living. We are living gendered lives every day. So this is the time we should be aware about all these, gendered aspects of our everyday life. And, one of the gendered aspects of life is health. Women and health, gender and health. So gendered, because our everyday life is gendered, it has also impact on our health. So to the next slide. Okay, before going to that, I just very briefly talk about how everything is so gendered. In fact, this COVID-19 is also so gendered, referring COVID-19 as most of the time as female. In Assamese, it's like Corona Baido ahi gol de ekhon district. Supposedly, I work at Dibrugarh. Someone is, sharing the status as Corona Baido Dibrugarh ahi gol de. Be aware. This is how it is. And there are so many misogynist jokes during COVID-19. There are so many. Like, for example, I hope many of must be aware about many of the jokes, like, restaurants are closed, be nice to your wives. And, there are photographs of women with all their eyebrows growing very much, or their mustaches on their, face. So because there is lockdown, they cannot go to the beauty salons. Women are, having this look. So the whole concept of beauty is also being very gendered. Then, the shadow pandemic, most of us have heard this, word, I'm sure, that, there is increase in gender-based violence because women are confined to their private spaces more, or when all the family members are together, there is increase of gender-based violence, various types. In fact, cyber gender-based violence are also being reported. Then, women's accessibility to healthcare services and health-seeking behavior has also changed. It is also gendered during this COVID-19 because generally women health is given so much of less importance. Women also has internalized that, because of those socialization process, our health is not very important. So COVID-19 has raised gendered aspect in this context as well. Also, most of the frontline workers who are at the lower level of the hierarchy, the ASA workers, A&M nurses, Anganwadi workers, mostly they are women. So, they are also facing so much of problem because of the COVID-19 situation and the lockdown, and they for ASA workers, they are not even getting their regular pay. There is burden on them because they have to also look after COVID-19 situation, also to the assigned work of them to look after the maternal and reproductive health. So these are the our lives are so gendered that COVID-19 has also become very, very gendered. Okay, to the next slide. What are the gendered aspects of women's health? How women's health is gendered. Mostly women's health is associated with reproductive and maternal health. So when we talk about women's health, or we discuss about women's health, be it health policies or any discussion and debates, mostly it is centered around the reproductive and maternal health. As if women do not have any other health problems other than reproductive and maternal health. So is the health policies. How health policies are gendered? Because women are considered as a category primarily in terms of mother, or within the sorry, I just saw a message, I think, regarding the ticketing. Yes, I'm going because it is important to talk about the gendered aspects of women's health. I'll definitely go. I am talking about that a little later. So, so these are the issues, health policies, even the culture of silence. Culture of silence, how it impacts that women are so silent about their health issues. In general, women are so silent about health issues. So, they do not speak about their health problems until and unless they, reach the maximum or the worst condition. So, this is how women's health is very gendered. To the next slide. So, these are the determinants of women's health: cultural norms and attitudes, the status of women, the preference for son, women in work, the, women's very less access to resources like income, education, and employment, or their access to healthcare services. So women's health is mostly poor. Women have ill health. If we compare with the percentage or the data, women's health is very, very poor. So now let's talk about the next slide. Okay. I would request everyone to have a very careful look at the pictures. I'll come to this when I'll be speaking in later later slides as I go on. So these are the few pictures. I have many pictures which we have clicked because I did not take the permission to use. I have just included some pictures from Google. To the next slide. So these are okay, before discussing about these things, so most of us, I'm sure who all are present today, we know, we are in love with tea, no? So for many of us, without a cup of tea, we cannot, start our morning, or when we have a headache, we go to the tea. So, but how many of us actually talk about the, the hard work or the various gendered aspects that goes behind those cup of tea? And when we talk about, plantation workers, these are the Plantation Acts, the Plantation Labor Act 1951, the plantation, Assam Plantation Rules 1956, the Plantation Labor Amendment Act 2010, according to which guidelines the various provisions or benefits are given to workers in the tea plantations. And one very important thing that nowhere in the acts the term labor is being used. But when most of us, when we refer to these workers, we refer as tea garden laborers. But the term worker is only being mentioned in these acts. Okay, to the next slide. So these are the various types of work, or we all know they were brought. They are the migrated population. They were brought to Assam during British period. There are two types of workers: those who do not know, permanent and casual and temporary workers in the tea gardens. And rules and regulations according to the PLA, Plantation Labor Act. And most important thing is that the benefits and various, be it health benefits, be it welfare benefits, mostly those benefits are fully given only to the permanent workers, and casual and temporary workers they do not give. And the wages are on the fortnightly wages, and Sunday wages are not being conducted. That is a off day, but they just get the wages for 6 days. To the next slide. So how gendered lives in a tea garden? Women workers in tea plantations are doubly marginalized. One, as a being belonging to the marginalized community, and as women. So women workers in tea plantations are doubly marginalized. So how, to the next slide, how gendered lives in tea garden? Until very recently, women workers received very lesser wages than men. They did not receive equal amount of though they were engaged to equal amount of work, and women are not being engaged in overtime work, and their nature of work is also so gendered. Women are mostly assigned to the active work of plucking, because it is believed that women have these nimble hands. They kind of when they pluck teas, women are considered as more suitable to pluck tea leaves, which result in better quality of tea leaves. And women also perform their unpaid domestic work as well as paid work. Unpaid domestic work because they perform all the household responsibilities, and paid work, the work they do at the tea garden. To the next slide. Then in many instances, husbands or the family members help them in the household activities, but that is only because that she can go out and earn more for the house. And then though they earn equally, they cannot, in many of the cases when we have conducted various cases, in fact, when I talk to these women workers, they say that I earn equally, but I give it to my husband or to my father. So they also do not, though they are economically kind of they are earning, so-called economically empowered to some extent, but they do not have the free right to speed according to their wishes. And mostly women are being considered as inferior to women. That is obviously the whole the society is such that is also applicable to tea gardens. To the next slide. There is lack of equal gender representations in workers' union as well. Though most of the workers are women nowadays, and then even though when it comes to the workers' union, there are very few. I think I don't have the data right now, but they are not being represented in the workers' union, be it ATSA or ASA or anything. And there is this, they are being treated badly due to alcoholism and demand for work. What is demand for work? The mothers are, most of the time, they are being asked by the other members of the family, so that you go for those who are permanent women workers, that you take the retirement so that the next person can take up the job and he becomes a permanent worker in the garden. And one important gender lies in tea garden, which has a very health complexity for women workers, that lack of toilet facilities at the work sites. There is no toilet facilities at the work site, and they also trivialize gender-based violence. Next slide. And then obviously here also, preference for male child is there, and after menstruation, many girls drop out. Gendered rituals or ceremonies are very gendered. And in tea gardens, one important aspect is that there is prevalence of child marriage, though it is not legal because lack of awareness and everything. Prevalence of child marriage is there, which has a health impact on women as well. To the next slide. So what are the health provisions as part of these Plantation Act? These are the, I have just mentioned very few, that drinking water, there should be drinking water, safe drinking water, there should be sanitation and toilet facility, medical facilities, and maternity benefits, sorry, as per the government rule and regulations. But these are maternity benefit acts and everything are only for permanent workers, not for casual or temporary workers. There is lack of safe drinking water, which is a very bad impact on women's health. Also, because of lack of sanitation and toilet facility, women face so many problems, UTIs and everything. They do not know that this is called UTI, but if you ask them or talk to them, they will slowly talk to you regarding what are the problems they face, because of this lack of facilities in sanitation and toilet. To the next slide. So what are the health conditions of tea garden women workers? They do not have access to safe drinking waters. Malnutrition, anemia, low blood pressure, weaknesses, especially during pregnancy, high maternal mortality rate. These are very, very important or concerning issues in all the tea gardens. Because of lack of access to safe drinking water, there are so many waterborne diseases, and because they do not have the overall tea garden workers are workers face malnutrition and anemia, but because women because of these issues, women face more problems, and that lead to high maternal mortality rate. And according to NRHM officials, Assam is, I think most of us know that Assam is, the maternal mortality rate is very, very high in comparison to the maternal mortality rate of India, the nation's rate. So, according to NRHM officials, because of this tea garden, the high maternal mortality rate in tea gardens, there are so much of a rise in the overall rate of Assam, MMR rate of Assam, because of there is high maternal mortality rate among tea garden women workers. And there is gap in access to health workers. Why gap in access to healthcare? Because there are so, in tea gardens, there are medical facilities, there are hospitals. But as per the rules, there has to be a hospital. But there are, in only very few tea gardens, we will find trained health professionals. The minimum quality is MBBS, and in most of the tea gardens, the doctors, in small tea gardens mainly, the pharmacist is the only health professional. There are no doctors. So they do not have the access to that minimum healthcare facilities. Also the ambulance services, the road conditions are so bad in the tea gardens. If we go inside the tea gardens, the roads are, it's not in a condition to be called as road. It's like a, any cultivation field. So when there is some emergency, if some pregnant women is in need, then by the time ambulance reaches there, she goes to, if the situation is critical, she goes to a very difficult condition. So these are the gaps in access to healthcare services. To the next slide. And most importantly, occupational health problems, because they have to pluck tea. I told you that, in the very first, when I requested all of you to have a very, minute look at the pictures I have shown earlier. It's the women who are plucking tea, and they are, having a basket on their heads. They have to pluck and put the tea leaves in the basket, and it is heavy because in many days what happens, on the basis of how much tea leaves they have plucked, their wages are being decided for the casual workers mainly. So because of all these things, they have backache, chest pain, knee pain, gastritis, or cough and cold. Cough and cold is so common here, in the tea gardens. And they just trivialize these health issues. It's like these are the common thing we face, day-to-day basis. So these are not big issues, but so this is the gendered aspect of health in tea gardens. They face all these health problems, but they have, there is gap in access to healthcare facilities. Even if they, for the very minor diseases like cold and cough and everything, they get the medicines for free in the hospitals. But if the situation is complex, or the disease are not very minor, then they are always referred to the nearby government hospitals. So what happens? They are also in the government hospitals also, because they are from the marginalized communities, the tea garden workers, and being women, there also they face so much of problems, challenges. So this is how they are living a gendered life or gendered health conditions in tea gardens. To the next slide. Okay, COVID-19 and tea garden women workers. So what are the problems that has posed in the context of tea garden women workers in this current situation? As I have already mentioned, women, trivialize their health problems. And now that there is COVID-19, their health-seeking behavior has changed. They even do not go to basic healthcare facilities. There is this stress, or, the mental anxiety that what if we go to the hospital, we catch the virus? Then, what if, we are good enough now, it's only cold and cough or these simple minor issues. If we go to the hospitals, if we come in terms of a COVID patient, then what will happen to us? So these are the things constantly going around, in their minds. And also, when the lockdown was in the initial stages, the lockdown was imposed, sites to be opened just after, I think, 14 days to the lockdown. So they have been working under this situation, and regarding maintaining the COVID protocols, what I can say, their physical distancing and everything is just, it's not actually happening. They, while waiting to give their tea leaves, or for the weighing of tea leaves, they do not maintain that physical distance, because they are not aware. They are aware to some extent, but because they have to perform their duties or perform their roles, plucking teas, the certain limit, this much tea leaves, certain cases they have to pluck, then only they will get their wages and everything. Because of those things, COVID-19 protocols are not being kind of maintained. And there are burden on ASA workers in tea gardens, because the ASA workers are, what they do, they go to the the workers lines where they live, they cater to the maternal mothers, or those the expecting mothers, or overall reproductive health and all. But now that they are also to look after those who are coming from outside to the tea gardens, they have to keep a record of that. So because they have to keep a record of all these issues, there is so much of burden on ASA workers, and it has posed many challenges for pregnant women workers. So this is how health conditions in tea gardens are. One thing I think I wanted to again say, mention in a little details, that because of this lack of worksite sanitation and toilet facilities, the discourse on gender and health, it talks that is the basic necessity for women's health, that there has to be toilet or sanitation facilities at the work site, but it is not there in the tea gardens. They have to go to the open. During their menstruation days, they are left out of options. Most of them use clothes. Many of them are not even aware about sanitary pads. That is okay, because now in the recent trend or the recent concern is that because of the climate change and all, sanitary pads are not very good. But the uses of clothes in a proper way, maintaining hygiene, they are not aware about that also. They do not know that you have to clean it properly with soap. They clean it with soap, but the taboos related to menstruation, that the cloth, they cannot open it in the, they cannot dry it in the open. They do not know all these minute things which are very important for their health. And also for the casual workers, the temporary workers, during the menstruation days, it becomes very difficult for them, because during those days when the wages are considered on the basis of how much tea leaves they have plucked, they also cannot go to their homes to change their clothes during their menstruation days. Because if they go, their productivity will become less, then they will get less wages. So these are the very, very gendered aspects of tea gardens and gendered health aspects of tea garden. So I think I'll stop here for the discussion. So I think the last slide, I request Priyanshu to show the last slide once. Yeah, so here I just wanted to request everyone that let's unlearn together. I have intentionally not written learn together, because we always know that we have to learn, but we have to unlearn together and raise our voices against everyday gendered aspects, because that is how with our small initiatives we can address these gender aspects, be it in everyday lives, be it for the tea garden workers, for anyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Debajanee, for that very systematic and organized presentation. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I
yes.
can
So thank you very much for this talk. Yeah, you must have really exercised your vocal cords speaking. But thank you very much.
Because we take classes for hours, so we have the practice. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So let me just probably ask you a few questions first, and then we can turn to the audience. So the participants are requested to put up their questions on the chat box, or you can maybe after I am done with my discussion, you can actually unmute yourself and ask questions to the speaker. I think you're also welcome to ask questions in Assamese if English.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. So let's do that. So let me first begin by asking you about you began by talking at great length about the history of women's studies as a field, a very interdisciplinary field of knowledge. And you kind of linked it up also to the different stages of the different waves of the women's movement, both abroad as well as India. And I think you also gestured at some point to the contemporary threats to the discipline of women's studies, especially in the current political climate. And also the fact that, for example, there have also been the setting up of new women's studies departments, let's say in Cotton University, for example. So, I mean, what would be your take in terms of, what do you think? Because I think you've already answered it in many ways, but let me ask you again that what do you think how do you think women's studies as an interdisciplinary field should evolve to address contemporary needs? What do you think should be done in terms of, the syllabus, faculty, disciplines, and so on? Yeah.
Yeah. So as I have already mentioned, the whole objective of women's studies is to, have an interdisciplinary approach so that, we can address all the issues which are not being addressed by other research methodology or other disciplines.
Right.
And as you have rightly mentioned, I actually wanted to say that, current political situation or whatever, we are facing a crisis, in fact.
Yes. Yes.
We don't know, as a center, as a faculties of women studies or being associated with women studies, the UGC extension to these centers are only till this September. So we are not yet sure what will happen to us after September.
That's right.
So, to address various issues and everything, I think the importance of women's studies or gender studies is very important. Because, in many other social sciences research or, be it history, political science, sociology, according to women's studies scholars, there is a gap, there is a difference between being gender sensitive and being gender inclusive. So women's studies tries to, bridge that gap.
Yes.
And as you have asked, what are the scope for students you asked, or what are
Yeah, no, I was just generally asking, in what ways do you think the department needs to evolve to be able to respond to contemporary needs?
Yeah, actually, I think all the centers are kind of across the country have evolved to great extent, but because of the extension or lack of funds and everything, that is the main problem in terms of involvement.
Right.
But I think in terms of evolve or the growth, the centers or women's studies have already catered to so many issues related to gender or women. That's what I would like to say.
Absolutely. Okay, and then I also had to ask you something about, to what extent or how do you think, your background in women's studies has, in some sense helped you do a lot of the field work that you do, especially in terms of, your the contemporary topic, the topic that you were talking about in terms of tea plantation workers. To what extent do you think your disciplinary knowledge has helped you understand these issues, and to what extent do you think your understanding of the discipline has been transformed by your field work practice?
Actually, that is a very relevant question. I'm sure those who are associated with women's studies will agree with me. Being associated with women's studies actually helps to question or see so many things which otherwise, tend to ignore.
Yes.
How I just want to mention very briefly how I kind of got interested into women's studies. Basically, I did my graduation and master's in political science. But while I was doing graduation in political science, there was this special paper on women in politics. Okay. So, this madam, I am very thankful to her actually for, cultivating the interest in women's studies. So she asked me to write a paper on the contribution of women to Indian national movement. So when I wrote that paper, because that time I was not aware about these, not much aware about this gender sensitivity or gender inclusion and everything. So I wrote that paper glorifying everything, like women did this, they contributed so many things to the national movement. So when she read that paper, she showed me that, this is not the case. There is a gendered aspect to this, though there were so many movements within the national movement for women to be a part of it. There are various other reasons, gendered reasons, that education for women so that she become a good mother and she can teach their children. So that was the starting point when I first got the essence of women's studies. Then when I got involved with my further research and everything, it has made me more gender sensitive. I can question now, or I can see so many gendered aspects. Even, earlier when we had menstruation or all those issues, at our home, we are asked to have a different place, to, eat different, at a different place and all. Those taboos, I can, also now I can, tell my mother or, my sisters that these are the things which are very gendered and constructed by the society. This is very normal issue. So we are just making an issue out of it. So that's how, and in fact, my, PhD research is on and around women and health in tea garden. So when I started my further journey with women's studies, it has made me, feel how I should be, very sensitive when I interact with them, gender sensitive, how I should interact with them, how in very, very small things which we, tend to normalize, there are so many gendered aspects to those aspects. So in that way, I think it has helped me to a great, great extent.
Yes. Oh, shit. Okay. Can you still hear me? Sorry.
Yeah.
I think my screen has gone off, but
yeah,
yes, I can hear you, Kiran.
Yeah. Okay. So, So I just wanted to ask you another question, which is that this is also partly from my own ignorance, which is that what determines what determines the difference between a contractual and a permanent employee, tea garden worker? Like what makes a woman permanent, and when does she become permanent?
Actually, what happens in the tea garden from the British period itself, there is this rule that, in a family, there can be 2 permanent workers. And if that permanent worker retires, the next person in line would get the job. So other than those 2 members, those who are working in the tea gardens, most of them work in the tea gardens.
Yes.
And now there is a trend that, many of them go outside for different works as well. They don't want to work in the tea gardens.
Yes.
So 2 members are permanent and others are considered as casual or temporary workers. So very simple, yeah.
I see. So they can't be a change that depending on, let's say, the economic needs of a family.
No, they cannot be. It has to be on the basis of the family composition and everything.
Okay. And then another question I wanted to ask, when you were talking about menstrual health and the taboos around menstrual health, I was also thinking about, the fact that you were telling us about how these women are not aware of the hazards to their health. In terms of both physical health, in terms of, different kinds of sicknesses and diseases, which are occupational hazards, but also in terms of their own menstrual health. And I was wondering if, in your interactions with them, how did they perceive you? I mean, did they have did they argue with you? Did they have a problem with, the reason why I'm asking you this is because sometimes we have certain notions of what we think is hygienic and healthy, right? And so was there some kind of a challenge to, let's say, your notions of what you think is, and I'm not saying anybody's wrong or right. I'm just saying that in the interaction, did you feel like these women workers had a different notion of what it means to be hygienic or healthy or clean or things like that?
Yeah, definitely. When we talk about, as a women's studies, we give importance or center to their experience or their narratives.
Right.
So when I interact or, with them or anything, I do not ask them, what is your concept? Why do you do it?
Right.
Because it is not good or bad. So we interact in the way that, what do you do, how you come, what are the difficulties you face during your menstruation days and
Right.
everything. I do not go to the hygiene thing, because that
Right.
is again against, as you mentioned, it is imposition should not be there,
Sure.
according to
Sure.
our perceived,
Sure.
perception of health and hygiene.
Sure.
Why I have said that, because of those issues, there are health hazards, because there are
Yes.
so many studies are there, medical, reports say it all.
Right.
When they go to the hospitals and everything, the underlying reasons, if we analyze those medical history, then we can connect to it, that, because they are not aware about these things, they are facing these kind of health problems.
I
So
see.
this is how it is
Right.
done.
But have there been any attempts to try and improve the infrastructure?
Improve infrastructure? No, because at the work site there is no facilities of toilet, as I have mentioned. At their household, at their places, there are of course toilets and everything. In the
Yes.
their line, it is called line. Workers line. The word is exactly used where they live. So they have their washrooms and their water supplies. If not running water, there are tubewells, so those kind of things. So there also the infrastructure is very, very poor. It is not up to the mark that, the way it has to be. So these nowadays government also, the government's, various programs or schemes are there for the toilets and everything. It is being implemented, but as everywhere, the quality is very, very poor.
Right. And there was this one aspect I was expecting you to touch upon, which is the whole question of domestic and sexual violence.
Yes,
is that rampant?
I think because somebody messaged that they want to talk about the, the health here, I must have missed it. Gender and sexual violence,
I mean, domestic violence and sexual violence.
Yes, domestic violence. As I have said that, it's like if I ask, I cannot ask directly, of course. If in the discussion, they will say, "Hey, motai to mari boy," it is, they normalize those domestic violence parts. So, and also, if someone wants to raise a voice against that also, because in the workers' union, there are no women representation. Their voices are always, marginalized.
I see.
And that's how it is.
But that's quite ironic, isn't it? Considering most of the working force is female.
Yes.
That not having, I mean, so there must have been some campaigns or movements to be part of the workers' union, isn't it? I mean, it seems like a big gap.
Yes, it is a very unfortunate. There is a big gap. There are some UNICEF and government intervention in regard to that, for this representation or, to address those child marriage and everything. But at the end of the day, only few get aware, and after they, those trainings get over, they again come to their normal, so-called normal. I should not be using so-called quote and unquote their normal lives.
I see. Okay.
So that is how.
I'll just turn to the questions from the audience so far. There's a question from Jitendra Das asking, what are the gaps in access to healthcare?
Yeah, gaps to access in healthcare, as I have already, I think, mentioned also, gaps in access in healthcare in terms of, the hospitals there, as part of Plantation Act and the government rules, the hospitals are there. But there is lack of health professionals. In many hospitals, there is the pharmacist only look after. There is no doctor, MBBS doctor. The minimum qualification according to the rule, Plantation Act, has to be MBBS doctor. And there are also certain, categorization for this much of workers. There has to be doctor, pharmacist, nurse, and so and so. And that is one thing that, there is lack of health professionals, and the road conditions and, their ambulance services, they are very, very poor. If they want to have, and if there is any emergency, supposedly in one garden, there are so many divisions. And as per the divisions, there are not enough ambulances to cater to the, the requirement of these emergency cases. And when for very minor issues like cold and cough, they have those very, those medicines which are not very pricey and everything, they get all the medicines for free. But if they have to buy the medicines which are costly, or they are referred to other hospitals, then again there is this difference of categorization as temporary and permanent. For permanent worker, they get some kind of reimbursement. For temporary workers, they do not get any reimbursement. And most of the time what happens, they are asked to withdraw money from their PF accounts, so that would be deducted from their wages.
There's another question from, thank you. There's another question from Bikash. It would be great if you could tell us a little about the response of various political organizations in the trade union leader regarding resuming work at the tea plantation amidst in the midst of the lockdown. And also, who do you see whose idea? I think who do you see the idea of controlling the bodies of women laborers in tea plantations as a tool of exploitation in the new economic framework? Yeah, how do you mean? Yeah, how is the what do you think of this idea that women laborers are being controlled? Yes.
To the first half of the question, that what are the responses of various political organizations in the trade union leader regarding the resume of work? At the very initial stage, some organizations protested, but I think there were some kind of I don't know, I should not be saying there's also understanding or whatever it is, because also there is one more thing, the tea garden workers, they love the tea gardens. For their plants, the tea the tea trees are there. They are so much, associated. They feel so much for those tea, trees or the overall tea gardens. So initial stage, there were some kind of resistance, but because they saw that, the garden is, teas are kind of going out of shape and everything, because for them that is the source of livelihood. If they do not love those trees, how will they get their wages? How will they live? So that ways they came out. In fact, there in many of the tea gardens, what happened, they came out to give their free that was called Shramdan. They came out to give free work for one day, for which they did not even take the wages. So this is how it is. And to the next part of the question, who do you see the idea of controlling the bodies of women laborers in tea plantation as a tool of exploitation in the new economic framework? Of course, the mindset of profit making and everything. So from the now that there are so many companies which own the tea gardens, their profit makings and everything, they want the quality tea leaves. So women are mostly assigned a tea plucking job, as I have mentioned, because of the concept of nibble hand, and that they pluck good quality tea leaves. They are gentle with the tea leaves and everything. So it is of course the the companies, and then comes all the hierarchical management and everything, and there is a division, babus, manager, assistant managers, and jamadar babus, sardars. So all of them kind of they control women's bodies, of course, in terms of their work, because many times they cannot shout at the man workers who, it is not like that men do not pluck. In many tea gardens, men also pluck. It's according to the composition of the tea garden, but mostly it's the women who are associated with this. So those hierarchy, they have always the control over women's bodies in terms of what they work in the tea gardens. And when it comes to the domestic spaces, it's of course the man of the families. Even though they earn for themselves, they do not have the right over their earning, or for that matter over their bodies as well. So this is how their women's bodies are being controlled.
Right, exactly. So I think this kind of brings back the point that you made earlier about how gender sensitization has to extend also beyond the workplace to talk about
Yes.
families and yeah. So I think that there was actually a follow-up question from Rukia also about whether their voices are heard. Are the voices of these women laborers heard?
No, I mean, I cannot say in a very, I do not see that their voices are being heard to a great extent, because there are studies and reports and everything. There are so many this thing, but at the level of policy implementation, very less has been done. But one good thing is that earlier women used to get very less days for as maternity benefits. Now, because of all these, I think studies and reports and voices coming from many organizations and activists or academia, the maternity benefit benefit provisions are same as per government rules. They also get 6 months of maternity benefit, but only for permanent workers. Again, there are the division between permanent and temporary. For permanent worker, they get the benefits. For casual workers, they do not get the benefits. They do not get the wages also, because they cannot work and everything. So this is, their voices are hardly being heard. In fact, they are the studies have kind of tried to, many studies and reports have kind of tried to capture their voices, but there are so much to be done. There are so much to be done. And in terms of their voices to be represented in the workers union, which is a very important part of the tea plantations, in workers unions, their voices are not being heard. There are very, very less women workers who are being represented. I think there will be, we can just count on our fingers. There are very few. In fact, not only in the workers level, in the tea garden, gender lives are also in terms of the managerial level as well. At the managerial levels, I think in Assam there is only one women manager who, in the APJ company. I think the last year she became, last year she became the one and only women manager. So at the managerial level as well as the workers level, the tea gardens are, the everyday lives in tea gardens are so much gendered.
And so there's been no intervention of women's rights organizations in the tea gardens?
For the workers part, there are very few. There are organizations, or there are NGOs, or like UNICEF and everyone. They are working in the tea gardens, but mostly related to health and welfare aspects, like for their sensitization regarding family planning, their health conditions, menstrual health, and in all those aspects. So for the rights of women in terms of political and economic rights, there are very few. Because I think there is, because this is also because that there are so much to be done at the basic level. So unless and until we kind of try to sensitize them about their basic needs, that there are rights for you, the health issues, these are health rights for you. You should be having the provisions for these health rights. So I think because that might be one of the reasons why at the political or economic front there are so many less work.
There's another question from Ria. What is the role and status of women tea plantation workers as from a gendered perspective? I mean, is there a role in family decision making, or is there any dowry system in the tea garden community?
Family decision making. When I showed the research project that we submitted to Ministry of Women and Child Development, when we were doing the field research for that project, we came to know that the study found that family planning, very few members are aware about family planning, and they the men do not go for the sterilization process. Most of the time it's the women who go. Of course, that is again restricted to the masculinity and everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so that is there. And dowry system, I don't think so it is so much prevalent, because first they're, most of the time they marry according to their wishes. They child marriage is also there. Other than that also, it's most of the time mutual consent. Because of the mutual consent, they get married. And there is also very interesting aspect here that, the man comes to the women's house is to stay there, as the, being a ghar jamai is not a very bad thing here in the tea gardens. For them, it is a very normal thing. If someone has to go to and live in the in-laws place, the man, it is okay. For that, so I think that is also very gendered, no? When I am talking to you, because it's the man associated with the man coming to this thing, and also there is one more earning member, their point of view. So I think that is also a gendered aspect, because there the man is associated with.
Yes, yes. Okay, I think Milan has a question. Milan, do you want to ask a question now?
Yes, thank you. Thank you,
Hi,
Debajanee.
Milinda.
So it's really nice to hear you, and it's so detailed and lots of information. So I'm trying to digest. So I have two categories of questions, something related to the tea and overall question or comment, So what I understand in tea garden, the houses are not belong to the people. It is owned by the company or the tea garden owner. Is that correct? From generation after generation.
Yeah, it was earlier there that, the land is not for the workers, that, it is in the name of the company. But recently in many tea gardens that, khazana diya from themselves, they can pay those things, and they, I think that KMSS also has to play a very big role in that. In many tea gardens, that process has already started to make the land in the names of those who are, residing there. Okay, so it is different to garden, but it has started. The process has started in many tea gardens.
And this law you talk about, like from each family, there's two people permanent. Is it same all over India, all the tea garden, or it is like Assam different laws? And because British made those laws, so is it same, tea garden in south or in north? Do you have any?
I am not very sure about the other tea gardens, but in the northern part, in the West Bengal and Darjeeling and these northern parts, it's more or it's mostly the same rule. I am not very sure about the southern part, because the Tea Plantation Act also says that, the state and the companies can also create their own rules as and when necessary, considering there are some terms and conditions.
So I think Kiran will agree with us. The British has done lots of damage to us. They made this section 377 in 1860, and they just make all this kind of laws to the all the minorities. Anyway, hopefully all this discussion, we would love to talk any discussion which make people, so-called, again quoted, normal people uncomfortable. Let's make, Kiran, what do you say? Let's make all these people, let's talk about all these taboo subjects, so that
absolutely
people a little bit aware, because we are so narrow mindset, right? We do not question. Let's start asking questions. So I hope that Enazuri become the forum we discuss about women rights and trans rights and LGBT rights, so many, and labor union rights. So anyway, I also wanted to bring to you that you are the fifth person along with us in the whole process. I have come across 5 people. Eventually, it will be great to have a small subgroup, maybe WhatsApp group, who either working with tea garden or tea garden education. There's a young girl, Anvesa, she was working. I was thinking when you bring this presentation, because I listened to so many presentations, so I got confused that who had talked. So I remember this person, she had talked. There's another person called Madhusmita who is also in Dibrugarh. She's working about gender rights in tea garden. Specifically, she's giving teacher training. I do not know if you know her, but she's doing excellent work in Dibrugarh. So I would love to connect you guys also together. So So just know that you are not alone. There are 5 people we can connect. We can have a subgroup to more power. You know, let's make a movement. You know, those are focusing on tea garden, labor education or rights and stuff like that. So, and the other part of my thing is that, you know, recently I have, you know, I don't want to be political, but I had supported Kangana because I really liked her guts. So I had sent a message that I wish, you know, it doesn't apply to all these guys, but I said that I wish the most men in India had half of her gut. All right. And many people got very offended, and specifically women, you know, I don't want to go to the political side, but I'm like, you know, I liked her gut. So I feel that quite often the women are themselves are women's, you know, worst enemies. I think the women put down each other's down.
Oh no,
you know,
God.
What?
Yeah, then I just come to there. Even I wanted to discuss earlier also. You know, there is this saying in Assamia also, "Nariye nari pradhan hotru."
Yeah.
But behind that thing, what is it that, you know, makes women be the enemy of women? There, when I was discussing about the gender socialization, you know, so socialize, because of the gender socialization process, women also internalize so many things that, you know, for them, those are the normal things, the gendered aspects. Yeah. So for them also to, you know, also in many instances, what happened, the mother-in-laws are portrayed as a villain, or, you know, the daughter-in-laws are portrayed as a villain. So there comes the gender and power, the concept of gender and power, you know, because as a woman in other, you know, as a mother and then the women in the family, she has the, there are very rare, you know, there are cases where they have also the power, but mostly in generally, if we speak, it's the mother or the women who has the less power. But when the daughter-in-law comes, she gets someone with upon whom she can exercise her power. So that has a, you know, intersectionality of gender and power. So this is that is the same thing behind, you know, the women are you know, at times enemy of women. You know, so in women's studies we say that, you know, there are many women who are more patriarchal than a man. You know, there are so many instances women can be more patriarchal. But why? Because we women have internalized all those social norms. Because of that, nari pradhan hotru, because of that, women are the biggest enemy of women. Because of that, because the socialization process, because of the internalization, you know, we internalize the things because that's the way we are seeing things, you know, we are you know, training our attitudes and capabilities. So that is what I think. In fact, in women's studies, what we believe, you know, because of that, these, you know, and women are the biggest enemy of women, and so and so.
And the last question, and also lots of comments is that, you know, you said, you know, the women's studies, like I have many friends from women's studies, and of course they had questioned me because, as you said, the internal patriarchy, you know, as you know, I'm a trans man. So being the youngest in the home, born as a female, you know, I inherit quite a lot of qualities that my father had, which I didn't like, but I inherited them. And somebody have to point it out that, you know, you are not much different from your father, you know, and then you reflect, oh, there. So, you know, but you know, how much changes is happening, because I still see my sister-in-law still reading Lakshmi Puja and talking about Lakshmi characteristic, or I still see, you know, my sister-in-law cooking and doing all this work while my brother is not much different from my father. And then I still see the women who study women's studies still bow down to the husband and allow the father to do kanyadan, all right, in the marriage. You know, when are you going to question that kanya is something to be donated? And I question all the students from women's studies. Are you going to allow that to happen? Are you going to speak up and say that enough is enough? We are not going to go through it. Because studying women studies, so-called theory studies, and keeping the practical different is not going to go, right? You know, I mean, I still saying that, you know, not only here in India, you know, even in Assamese families in the US, not much different, same thing. Women work, you know, then come home, then take care of the kids and cook. Maybe a little bit different, but still we have the similar thing. The guys will go one side, they will talk about cars and, you know, football games, and women sitting in a corner cooking, and, you know, so we still have that. So when women, have you seen any changes after all these women's studies courses and all? Have you, how far, you know, what have you changed? Because quite often, you know, after 25 years, when I come back and try to adjust, you know, my head goes bonkers because I do not connect with anybody, because still it's such a patriarchal society. So please help.
Yeah, so coming to the first thing, how much has changed? Not much has changed. One thing, because the whole discipline of women's studies has been considered as a peripheral, you know, discipline. So the students, those who come to the women's studies, that is a bitter truth. In most of the instances, women's studies is not their first preference, you know. So that is there, but that is another thing, that when they come and when the first thing we say that, you know, let's unlearn things, because there are so many things we have to unlearn. Learn is a different thing. We always learn something or the other, but we have to unlearn so many things. So they slowly become a part of women's studies, but because in many instances what happens, that happens to other disciplines also, university degree is you know, kind of object. You know, we want a degree from the university just for the namesake, because we have a degree. So that is there. So because of these things, first, women's studies is not considered as an academic discipline at all. Let alone the, you know, my mother or others and everything. My mother knows it because I work there, or, you know, I'm associated with. But it is very difficult to make my relatives understand what women's studies is. In fact, within the university also, when students go, go by our center, they kind of ask, oh, what is this? And what is all women's studies? What do they teach? As I started my talk, that, you know, embroidery and everything. So that is there. And yes, the object, you know, the women students or faculties or, you know, activists associated with women's studies, they are also not out of those patriarchal mindset, because of so many constructs, because of so many gendered aspects of our life. But slowly, I think for some, they are trying to change step by step, because these our patriarchal mindset or the gendered aspects are so deep rooted in our society that, you know, we cannot change it radically. So very slowly we try to change. And outreach activities and extension activities of all the women's studies centers are a big part of this process, because when we go to the field for gender sensitization programs and everything, at least after the programs, they open up to talk about periods, you know. Otherwise they do not want to talk about the periods and all other menstrual issues, you know, because we address very people from very rural background, or, you know, women from self-help groups and everything. So at least they try to, you know, open up. I remember in this February, 14 February, Kamala Bhasin, they have started this 1 billion rising against gender-based violence across the world. So this time we also organized this program, because in October she came to our, she visited our center for 2 public talks. So we were discussing, and she told, why don't you, we only showed our interest, that why don't we also start this 1 billion rising. So as a part of 1 billion rising, there were so many programs, debates and everything also. And one program was that, you know, we invited women from self-help groups. So initially we talked about, and because the 1 billion rising is about gender-based violence, it was a little difficult to make them understand what gender-based violence is all about, you know, that, you know, somebody shouting at you, the man, out of something, that is also in one way or some other way, that is also a gender-based violence. So slowly by the end of the program, when we tried to interact with them, 2 or 3 came, and they shared their experiences at the household. Also, when many of them also work at the, other houses, like as a house help and everything. So when they, travel and everything, every day they face, sexual abuses in the autos, and Bikram is what called in Dibrugarh. So, they face those problems. But, because of this, they feel shy and everything to discuss with others. So in that platform, they told that, amar logoto enekwa hoy baido janene, ag seatat bohibole bhoy lage driver logot. So for us, that is at least one, achievement, one kind of that, they have at least come up and shared those experiences, so that we can also make them understand there are so many other gender-based violence, and how you should, raise your voices against each and one these kind of violences. So I think to some extent there are changes, but because of the peripheral, existence of the discipline, and, because of the deep-rooted nature of patriarchy, it will take, I don't know, so many times. And also because of this COVID-19, in many instances, we are going again back to so many years, these whatever some essence of equality we have achieved, I think many of that we have lost also during these few months of lockdown. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Debajanee.
Yeah.
Thank you. Debajanee, we just have time for 2 more questions.
Yes.
I'd just like to request, I think Daksha Parmar has a question, so you're free to unmute yourself and ask a question now.
Okay. Thank you, Kiran. Can you hear me, Debajanee?
Yes.
Okay. I am Dr. Daksha. I teach here at IIT Guwahati in the Department of HSS. I had one comment, I just wanted to know, like you said that there are no women organization or in the trade unions, or there are no women representatives in the trade unions. But I just was very, keen to know, are there no women in, there are no trade unions of women in the tea gardens? Because let me come to it. Because I'm sure there has to be some organizations where women's voices are being heard, their issues related to the work and the occupation. And I also wanted to know if there is a difference based on, say, the temporary workers and the permanent workers. Are there associations or women's political organizations which are raising the voices of the women? Okay, so this is one of the question. And second questions, particularly related to trade unions in the tea gardens. And if you see one of the difference between, say, the tea gardens in the Assam, the state of Assam and West Bengal, and if you compare it with Kerala, the women are in the forefront in the trade union movement, and there have been a lot of movements on related to the wages, or the unpaid wages or of women workers, particularly in the tea gardens of Kerala, and they have led very good movement which led to, say, the management paying their dues back. So I am really curious to know, are there no such organizations or protest led by women in the Assam tea gardens? And secondly, there is one very, I also wanted to also ask you as to my student, she did her dissertation on maternal health in the tea gardens of Dibrugarh, and she found out that, most of the health workers are from a different community. Okay, so there is this difference in the way they look at the tea garden community. So the A&M will not visit the house of the tea garden worker. Now there are different kinds of discrimination even inbuilt in or the prejudice and biases in the health workers. So do you think a health, when it comes to the health of or providing health care to the tea garden population, representation from them in this government jobs, or ensuring that they have a worker, okay, a health worker from their own community, like we have Ashas, okay, will make a difference in terms of providing proper medical care to them in the field or where they are? living? Because I see like the main findings from her dissertation was a fact that the difference in the community or the social background of the health worker was one of the major determinant of the woman in the tea gardens community, whether she is accessing or able to access medical care or not. So these are two of my observations. I would like you to comment on this.
Yeah, I'll first comment on the second part of the question. Actually, I was about to mention regarding that when I was talking about the gap of access to healthcare services. That was one of the point I missed in my presentation, that, you know, in most of the tea gardens, the ASA workers or the ANMs are not from the, the tea community. Actually, tea community is not a very correct word to say, whatever. So they, there are very few ASA workers or ANMs who are from their own community, right? So because of that, there is a, definitely, you have pointed it rightly that, you know, because of that, there is a gap in the access to healthcare services and those prejudices and everything. But in many tea gardens, there are 2-3 numbers of ASA workers I have come across. They belong to their own tea community. But in that case also, there are so many gaps in the access to healthcare services, you know, because again, when they go to the higher authority for their provisions and everything, at that phase, they face some kind of discrimination because they belong to the tea garden, they belong to the tea garden. So that way, at the very first, I said that the, tea garden women face double marginalization. So that is there. And to come to the first question, I mentioned that in the workers' union, those who belong to the tea workers, in the context of Assam only, there are very few women representation in those particular workers' union of the tea gardens. Of course, in South, trade union, the whole concept of trade union is much more active and strong in the other parts of India, especially in the southern part. In Assam, the trade union is, in comparison, the trade union movement as such, I think, a little less active than the southern part or other parts of India. So in that context, I think, as per whatever I have, studied or I have come across in Assam, in this context, for women's representation in workers' union or for their, health or welfare or educational provisions, there are organizations who are working, of course, not be it some kind of government organization like UNICEF, international organization, UNICEF, UNDP, Oxfam, and very many organizations from the ground level. They are definitely working. There are so many organizations working for women's rights, be it health right, be it educational or other welfare activities of tea garden women workers. But the way in the southern part, as you have mentioned, the tea state in Kerala and everything, there is a lack of strong movement, presence of strong movement in this part of, I think, in the tea gardens of Assam. I'm not very sure about the West Bengal tea gardens because these trade unions, the aspect of trade unions and everything, I have not given a very in-depth look into. So in the context of Assam, there is a lack of strong trade union movement. There were movement, in the context of when Melinda asked that, women were, the houses are not in the name of the persons who were residing. For that, there is a movement. Not very strong, but there is a kind of movement that so that they become the owners of their houses. So it has started, the process has started in many tea gardens. Their houses are being named to them. The land belong to them, not to the company. So in this context, there is a movement. from trade union kind of a movement, but not in the context of women's rights and rights, tea garden women workers' rights. There are organizations working, not trade unions. So
okay.
in the context of Assam, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I just have this one question from Riju Moni, who could not hear you because of couldn't listen to you properly because of some technical problem. But his question is that is the management somehow directly responsible for poor maternal health, and have maternal health schemes benefited women?
Maternal schemes, like the way I have mentioned that, Maternity Benefit Act has been implemented for the permanent workers.
Yes.
And of course, there is a part of lack of interest at the part of management, especially the companies, because the management who are working at the tea gardens are also accountable or answerable to the the companies mostly situated, the companies are the main head offices are either in Mumbai or in Kolkata. So they run the all management officials. So, and at this new liberal economy, as I was mentioning, or, the main objective of profit making. So the main objective of these companies are to acquire more and more profit. So not giving much importance to the, facilities, welfare facilities, or, infrastructural facilities in the tea garden. So that is one observation I have come across. And what was the next thing? Maternal, I think maternity benefit, I have already, mentioned that, for the permanent workers, they, in most of the tea gardens, they have implemented the recent Maternity Benefit Act of 6 months for the permanent. For the temporary, there is no such, scheme.
Yeah, I think what you said about profit making connects to the last question on the chat box, which is that millions of rupees in PF accounts of tea workers lie unclaimed. What do you have to say about that? And for all the tea that India sells abroad, is there no direct or indirect benefit that a worker gets from bringing in such a huge amount of dollars?
To be very honestly, actually, I have not, investigated or kind of looked into this aspect that, millions of rupees from the PF accounts are unclaimed. I am not very much aware about it. But one thing I am aware about it that, whenever they are in need of some kind of amount, they are, be it for medical purposes or everything, they are being asked to withdraw the money from the PF accounts, and that amount will be deducted from their wages. Right. So this aspect I know, but this unclaiming, I am not the right person to comment on, because I have not looked into it in a very in-depth manner.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry, we have really strained your voice today.
No, that's okay.
But thank you very much for sharing your scholarship with us and your field experience with us. I'm sure we all learned a lot, and it was a great pleasure. Thank you all for being here, and thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much to the whole team. Ananjali, Melinda, and Priyanshu has been in touch with me from the very beginning. He was the one to, contact and, talked about it. And Kiran, you also, since yesterday we have been in touch. And Bubbly is also there for the posters and everything. And all of the members of Ananjali, I would like to express my sincere, gratitude. It is always a great feeling to interact with so many people regarding our experiences and the work we do. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.